Research Hospital, an amount which totaled $15,000. For more news of the Catholic Perspective, visit EWTNnews.com. I'm Teresa Tomeo, and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping? Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is the program that will answer the age-old question, is it St. Bernard or St. Bernard? What say you, David Anders?
I think it depends on whether you're talking about the doctor of the church or the pet.
The dog.
Right.
Well, this is the feast day of St. Bernard of Clairvaux, so that's where we're going to leave that. So now that we've got that out of the way, we can answer your questions on this program, which is called to Communion, a program specifically for non-Catholics. So if that's you, if perhaps you stepped away from the Catholic faith 50 years ago and now you're looking to be perhaps reunited with the faith of your youth, or maybe you've never been a Catholic, but you've got some questions about the Catholic faith. What is keeping you from crossing over that 1-yard line into the goal zone? Give us a call. We would love to answer any questions that you may have regarding the Catholic faith. 1-833-288-EWTN is our phone number. That's 833-288-3986. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Since this is the Global Catholic Radio Network, if you're listening outside of the U.S. and Canada, you'll want to dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. So we give you plenty of ways to correspond with the program. If you wish, you can even send us an email. ctc@ewtn.com is our address. Charles Beery is our producer, Ryan Penny is our phone screener, and Jeff Burson is on social media, giving you 2 more ways to contact us. If you're watching us today on YouTube or Facebook, you can put your question in the comments line. Jeff will slip that down to us here in Studio One. I'm Tom Price, along with the aforementioned Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Doing very well. And you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty decent, thank you.
Glad to hear that. I know that you had some other duties, responsibilities going along with your work at the diocese, and yet you took one for the team, stopped what you're doing, and came here to do radio, and we appreciate that.
I love coming.
Yes, indeed.
One of the great privileges of my life that I get to get on the radio with you and talk about the Catholic faith, which is really what I enjoy more than just about anything else.
Absolutely. Well, we're blessed to have you. Here's an email from Gretar in Iceland. Gretar says, I belong to the Lutheran Church and was recently comparing Luther's small catechism and the Catechism of the Catholic Church on the issue of the Eucharist. I noticed that for Martin Luther, the forgiveness of sins is the main benefit of the Eucharist. In looking to the section on the Eucharist in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, there are not many words spent on the forgiveness of sins that I could find. So could you please help me understand this difference? Also, could you address what relationship there is between the Eucharist and sin in the Catholic Church? Thanks, Gretar, and that's from Iceland.
Yeah, thanks, Gretar. I appreciate the question a lot. So there are a lot of differences between Luther and the Catholic Church on the doctrine of the Eucharist. The most important of which is that Luther denied that the Mass, now the Mass is the rite of the Church whereby we confect the Eucharist. The Eucharist is brought into being in the Mass. That the Mass itself, not just the sacrament, but the Mass itself, is a sacrifice. It's something we offer to God. That's the teaching of the Catholic Church. Luther denied that. And that's a critical difference. And it gets into the question of these other questions that you've raised, because for a Catholic, the ultimate sacrifice is that of Christ, right? Whose sacrifice is so worthy because of the great holiness of his life. It was this complete self-donation of an innocent person who dies as a martyr for love and justice, and that's pleasing to God. As any sort of heroic act is pleasing, but Christ was pleasing in a supereminent kind of way because of the dignity of his person. And we're called to imitate that kind of self-donation. St. Paul says we have to offer our bodies as living sacrifices. So this act of sacrifice is the central act of religion, right? That we give up something of value for God. And in the Christian life, unlike for the Jews, where the washings and purifications were of the body, the purification that we have to make sacrifice to God is of the heart. Right? Christ talks about that. He says, if you have your gift on the altar, first go be reconciled to your brother, then come back and make your gift. St. Paul says, cleanse yourself of every sin, every impurity of body and spirit. Right? We have to mortify ourselves and give up our sins to be able to make adequate sacrifice. King David in Psalm 51 says, you don't want my sacrifices and offerings, Lord, but create in me a new heart, O Lord. Take not your Holy Spirit from me. Wash me. Then I can offer sacrifices. So the forgiveness of sin is an effect of the Eucharist, right, in that our venial sins can be forgiven in the Eucharist. But if we come to the Eucharist with grave sin, if we're unrepentant, right, we haven't made an offering of ourselves to God, and we're unwilling to turn our will from sin to righteousness, then rather than really worshiping God, we're blaspheming him. And so we come to the Eucharist to make an offering to God and to receive grace to strengthen us in our ongoing relationship with him and our growth in holiness. But to be worthy to go to Holy Communion and to make this offering of ourselves, we first have to be cleansed in the waters of baptism and or in penance, right, in the sacrament of absolution. And so that's a major difference between Luther and Catholics about the nature of the Eucharist. See, Luther thought that you couldn't really get cleansed of sin. And as you know, you've probably read his sermon, Two Kinds of Righteousness. Luther thought that what makes you righteous before God is not your own moral behavior, but rather the imputed righteousness of Jesus. The righteousness of Christ is like glommed onto you, an alien righteousness, he called it, not your own righteousness. And that the human heart would remain wicked, right, and alienated from God. And you're going to be accepted through faith alone because of what Christ did. Don't really think that you can be purified of sin, really. And in fact, doesn't think that sin separates you from God. Thinks you can go out and sin grievously and you can still remain in relationship with God. That's not the teaching of the Catholic Church. We have to be made right with God in our moral life, in our interior life, if we're going to worship him truly.
Gretar, thank you so much for your email. Delighted that you're listening to us in Iceland. In a moment, we'll be talking with Aid in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, checking us out today on YouTube. There's a line open for you right now, 833-288-EWTN. Call now.
Prayer is an opportunity to spend quality time with God. So pray from the heart. Let God know you trust him, believe in him, and most of all, that you love him. My favorite prayer that I say many times a day is, Jesus, I trust in you. It is simple, but as we know from St. Faustina, it reaches his heart.
I'm Doug Keck, and this is an EWTN bookmark brief. I just had the pleasure of speaking with Father Leo Petalinghug about his latest book, Saving the Family, The Transformative Power of Sharing Meals with People You Love, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, published by Sophia Institute Press. Let's get an overview of this particular book, how it's different than your prior work.
This book is a how-to practice the theology of food. And a lot of people think, what is this theology of food business? Well, the concept of God becoming food is for a reason, and that is to have communion with his family. And so what I want to do is show people how to have communion with your family, and in so doing, save them. Father Leo Petalinghug, and again, the book is Saving the Family, The Transformative Power of Sharing Meals with People You Love. Worth checking out. Available through our EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. And this has been a Bookmark Brief. Thanks for stopping by.
It's called Communion here on EWTN. I'll give you that phone number one more time, and then we will go to the phones, 833 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Tomorrow morning on Catholic Connection, Teresa Tomeo will have on the wonderful Janet Morana discussing pro-life news. And I got to tell you, Janet is on top of everything dealing with pro-life issues. She has been on top of it for an awful long time in her work with Priests for Life. So you'll definitely want to tune in tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN Radio. And if you're ready now, we'll go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN, beginning with Aid in Windsor, Ontario, checking us out today on YouTube. He's a first-time caller. Aid, what's on your mind today?
Hi. So basically, I was wondering. I have two questions. They'll be brief. The first one is basically why not pursue the various pleasures of life instead of God? It seems as though pursuing money and fame and power, women or whatever, these are things that could make me or anybody happy. So why opt for God instead of those things? And secondly, if I want to be a Christian today, if I make the decision today, I want to be a Christian, what do I do, essentially? It seems as though if I go through RCIA, I basically have to wait till next Easter, next year to get baptized, which I guess would mean I can't be a Christian till next Easter. So what do I do in that meantime if I want to be a Christian today?
Yeah,
so,
thanks. These are
questions.
great questions. I really appreciate them. So first of all, the things in the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, will fail to satisfy. Ultimately, that's just the truth of the thing. And pleasure brings great pleasure. Pleasure brings great pleasure, although diminishing. Pleasure brings diminishing pleasure. And the more you have of one of them, the more you need to have of one to get the same rush. You know the famous statement from J.P. Morgan, how much money does it take to make a man happy? Just a little bit more. But that's also true of sex. That's true of food. It's true of, houses, whatever, And, a lot of times what strikes us as being enough or being desirable is relative to what our neighbors have. All right, it's not an absolute value, right? I mean, it's not an absolute quantity, I should say. So, what counts as a lot changes throughout the course of history based on how we compare ourselves. Well, if you live your life in the comparison playing game, that can lead to madness. Yeah. Really, it really can, and it doesn't ultimately satisfy. And I don't know how old you are. Your voice sounds like you're probably a younger man than I am, and you move through the course of life, and you get some of the goods of the world, and you feel good about yourself. And it's not wrong to have accomplishment. Accomplishment can be a good thing, but you'll encounter moments of your life when maybe relationships are falling away, breaking off, and betrayal and loss, and or a loved one goes off the rails into addiction or crime or something, and you're like, what is it doing for me now that I have sex or power or a beautiful house or whatever? And it seems hollow in comparison to what we experience as much greater and more transcendent goods. And just as the love of a human being, real, felt, reciprocal, collaborative, self-giving, open, trusting love is something that we know because we can experience it. Love of a parent for a child, love of spouses, a best friend. We wouldn't give that up, right, for a new car. And I wouldn't give up my best friend for a new car. Never would I give up a best friend for a new car, even less my wife or my child. Even greater can be the rewards of friendship with God, right? And for God's friendship is different from human friendship because God is remote from us. We can't touch God in the way we can touch a friend or see or taste or hear or smell. But we can approach him. We can approach him by faith, and we can approach him in a kind of darkness that comes with it, a kind of longing for deeper knowledge, and that dialectic between sensing God and having faith in God, moving towards God, and yet always knowing that there's deeper and deeper into God that we can go. That's kind of the drama of the spiritual life, which comes with ups and downs, right? Being a Christian doesn't inoculate you against suffering or confusion or loss or pain, no. But it does give you hope. It gives you meaning, right? And as you come to imitate the life of Christ and the saints, this revaluation that you have of your experience transforms you and makes you into a saint, makes you into someone noble. My grandfather was a holy man. He wasn't a Catholic. He didn't know about the Catholic Church. If he had, I think he probably would have been, but he was a holy man. He was a good man. He was a man of great integrity and virtue. When he died, people came out of the woodwork and they said, your grandfather was the finest man I ever knew. And I think all of us can relate to how desirable a state of life that is, right? I think we would like to be the sort of person about whom others would say, he was the finest man I ever knew, right? We don't admire those simply in virtue of the wealth that they acquire, and you can think about public figures in the world today, or recently deceased public figures, who had a lot of the world's goods, and yet they were reprehensible, and they ended quite badly in ignominious circumstances. If you think about recent current events, and think, what are the islands and the houses and the yachts and the planes and the boats and the apartments in Manhattan and all this? What are they doing? They're so tawdry in comparison to a life well lived. And you look at the lives of the saints, contemporary saints, replete not only in charity but hope and holiness and faith, and the kind of unconquerable power of such a life, and the amount of good that a person like that can do in the world, not only through their physical circumstances but through the power of their charity and example, how it can just pervade so many things and touch so many lives. It's a transcendent kind of good. It's different from like a car, which I can't share with you. I can give it to you, but then I've lost it. But the spiritual goods aren't like that. I can have more and more and more of a spiritual good, share it with you, and it only multiplies, right? These are the kinds of goods of the spiritual life that make them intrinsically desirable. And of course, the ultimate horizon of that kind of life is eternity.
Yeah.
When you arrive at the end of the story, the reward is infinite, and the goods are infinite, and no longer remote, no longer in that dark and paradoxical dance of up and down, but now the fulfillment of all desire. In comparison to which the car, the house, the new lawnmower, the sex, is trivial in the extreme. And but the goods of this world, they can have an instrumental value. Sex for the sake of raising a family. A house for the sake of housing a family. A car for the sake of, giving a ride to my neighbor, or my kids, or whatever. An education for the sake of serving the church or your fellow man. Better to have these things than to die rich, satiated, and alone, and morally ugly. How to become a Christian, and should you wait until you can be baptized next Easter? Yeah, you're not removed from the life of the church if you're a catechumen. You're part of the church. Catechumens are a part of the church, right? And so you can begin to live the spiritual life as a catechumen, which is a real spiritual life.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you can participate in the graces of the church, not all the sacraments of the church, but the graces of the church and of the Mass and the prayers and the teaching, the catechesis. You begin to do penance and works of charity and collaborate with others and form spiritual friendships, and many, many goods of the spiritual life come to those who are catechumens. And of course, that longing and anticipation for baptism or confirmation and first communion, that is the nature of your spiritual life, right? That enters into the spirituality. My desire for the Eucharist, right? That's the character my spirituality has now. This longing for the Eucharist, and it will color your experience of the faith that you've had this distance to prepare yourself, and so the thing's more meaningful to you when you get there.
Yeah. Aid, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate it. And that opens up a line for you now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 here on Call to Communion on EWTN. Let's go to Elizabeth now in Richmond, Virginia, checking us out today on Sirius XM 130. Hello, Elizabeth. What's on your mind today?
Hi, gentlemen. I just wanted to say I was baptized Episcopalian, born and raised, and but I'm seriously consider converting for a variety of reasons, but largely due to Dr. Anders' show and EWTN in particular. I just get so much out of it, and I've read Dr. Anders' book, How the Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, which is just wonderful. So I wanted to thank you for your ministry so much.
Thank you.
My question is, I was telling a neighbor, good friend of mine, about my desire to potentially convert, and she was just shocked and said, I can't believe anyone would join a church that is so corrupt with this priest sexual abuse scandals going on. And I said, well, I mean, it's not like they don't deal with it. You know, the church deals with these issues. And she said, well, you never hear of them being arrested and going to jail, and they just get called back to Rome, and then you never hear from them again. And I didn't know how to answer that one. I didn't know how to respond, so I hope you can help me.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, that is just a bunch of hooey is what
Hooey,
that is. That's
a technical term.
That's just a bunch of hooey is what that is. You know, I when I'm not on the air at EWTN, I work for the Diocese of Birmingham. It's a small, teeny, tiny little backwater diocese. You know, we're not that big in the Catholic world, small little diocese. So I can't speak for everywhere, but I can tell you about what it's like, you know, in the innards, in the gears, you know, of the machinery, all the bureaucracy of the Catholic Church. And we haven't had a priest, a religious, I guess, and a member of the clergy who has been credibly accused of abuse or anything in ages, just ages and ages and ages. You know, as someone who works in the business of Catholic ministry, you know where the trouble comes from. Like 99% of the time, it's boundary violations by lay people. And what do I mean by a boundary violation? It's like not rape and this kind of thing. Not those things have happened, of course, but like most of the stuff that you deal with on a daily basis is, you know, somebody walks into the girl's bathroom that shouldn't, looking for somebody, or, you know, somebody touches somebody on the shoulder that they shouldn't touch, and the stuff that you don't think that's not sex abuse, but gosh, that was bad judgment. Gosh, that was bad. Why did you do something that stupid? That was bad judgment, you know. That's most of what you deal with. And to be honest with you, my interactions with priests, like, you know, priests I know, they're good men, they're good people, and they're scared out of their wits, right? Because the culture of accusation and suspicion against clerics is just huge. And in my judgment, it's just radically disproportionate to reality. Because not that there haven't been priests that have done bad stuff, but look, when I was growing up, I was not a Catholic. I went to a non-religious, secular, independent private school for high school. That school just went through their own internal house cleaning, and in a public letter, you can read it online. I mean, I'm not telling secrets here. Publicly named, here are the teachers that were credibly accused of abuse of kids in our institution. And I knew them. And I was like, yep, that's one. Yep, there's another. I knew those guys. Yep, we knew it. You know, that was the way it was going. And every institution is like that. You know, there's Carol Shakeshaft of Hofstra University says there's 100 times more sex abuse of children in the California public school system than there is of abuse of children in the Catholic Church. All right, but they have, you know, they're a protected class in a sort of way because they're part of the progressive universe of the media, and they're not going to go devour their own the way they take glee in going after the Catholic Church. So I'm not saying there hadn't been bad stuff that goes on, but the way this stuff gets reported in the media just does not capture the reality of the danger of sex abuse in society, most of which, as you know, takes place in homes, takes place in people's apartments, you know, takes place with dates, takes place with you know, mom's boyfriend, takes place with your public school teacher, takes place with your camp counselor. I mean, it's an ancient problem. It's not going to go anyway anytime soon. And in my experience, your Catholic priest is not the guy you got to worry about. Okay? And if anything, the rules that the church has put in play right now are very quick to remove somebody from ministry just on an accusation. Right? And that's not the way civil justice works. Right? You got to prove your case in a court of law and innocent until proven guilty. That's not how we're operating in the Catholic Church now. Everybody's walking on eggshells, and it's like, whoop, zip that guy out of there quick, just on an accusation. You can ruin somebody's life with an accusation, right? And there are abusers who are in jail, right? There have been massive civil lawsuits against the Catholic Church with proved cases of sex abuse that have been dealt with, all right? So is there corruption? Of course there's corruption. Are there bad clerics? Of course there are bad clerics. But the way the secular media depicts this is just not reality.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for your call, and we'll be praying for you on your road to possibly becoming a Catholic yourself. In a moment, we'll be talking with John in St. Louis, Bart in Madison, Wisconsin, Bob in Oklahoma City, Keith in Houston. A lot of calls coming in today here on EWTN's Call to Communion. We're glad that you're with us.
The Venerable Fulton John Sheen.
If we wish to keep our rights and liberties, we must also keep our God. Piety and patriotism go together. That's the first glory of being an American.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Father John Riccardo.
The ultimate answer to the question of where I meet Jesus. Because obviously, in imperfect ways, I meet him almost anywhere. I meet him in creation. Whether it's the majesty of a sunrise or a sunset, you sense and you see something of the person of God, his majesty, his power, his awe. I can have access to him in ways, in many places and fashions. The fullest place we meet Jesus, the place where you and I on earth most have access to the Father, where we accomplish God's will on earth, are those minutes on Sunday, which so many of us find tedious and somehow see as an obligation. So please God, by the power of his Holy Spirit, he will give us the grace to understand more profoundly what it is that really happens when you and I come to church.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
Now there's a fast and easy way to get in touch with EWTN. The EWTN Everything Number. Call 1-800-447-EWTN to get the latest information on programming, special events, pilgrimages, and more. Our EWTN Family Viewer Services representatives are ready to help you with whatever your needs may be. The EWTN Everything Number. 1-800-447-EWTN. EWTN.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. You don't have to be a woman to enjoy Women of Grace tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
The Tuesday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. We've got full phones right now. That is a blessing. When a line does become available, you're welcome to grab it at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here now is John in St. Louis, listening on Covenant Radio. Hello, John. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Dr. Anders, it's a wonderful privilege to speak to you again. I'm wondering, why is it that God seems to be so satisfied with human suffering? Why does he require it? Why does it satisfy him? I go all the way back to what's supposedly the oldest book in the Bible, Job, and it appears that God enters into what appears to be a sport with Satan over Job's righteousness and allows Satan to visit him with all sorts of torments, and you can go all the way through requiring this awful suffering from his own son to save us, and it just almost overwhelms me to the point where, why isn't he thought of as the God of suffering as opposed to the God of love? And one other question I've been dying to ask you, could you please define for me your use of the word compulsion when you discuss mortal sin? Specifically, is it external compulsion Is it internal compulsion, such as addiction, etc.? I'd like to hear your specific definition of when you use the word compulsion without compulsion.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I appreciate the question. On the question of suffering, so, look, prescinding from the question of God for a moment, suffering is real. There is suffering in the world. There it is. And I mean, like, you know, I got kind of a backache right now while we're talking. I mean, you can't get away from it, right? There is suffering. It is a problem. What perspective should we take on suffering? You know, the Buddhist point of view is that suffering is literally meaningless. I mean, it has a cause, but it's meaningless. It serves no function. Sharon Salzberg is a very popular American Buddhist writer and promoter of Buddhism in the West, kind of a missionary for Buddhism in the West. I heard a talk by Salzberg one time when she said, suffering is not redemptive. It's not purposeful. It's not beneficial. It's just suffering. Well, that's a point of view. That's a point of view. Okay? You know, it's a Buddhist point of view. It's an atheist point of view. Atheist says suffering is not redemptive. It's just suffering, right? And then there's another point of view. Well, maybe it has a function. Maybe it has a purpose. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe it's mysterious and yet still purposeful. And I look at the lives of Catholic saints. My favorite illustration of this, of course, is Josephine Bakhita, who suffered about as much as a human being could, but looked back on her life and said it was good. She said, I know that I'm definitively loved, and I'm awaited by that love, and so my life is good. And I think about someone like Christopher Hitchens, the atheist critic of all religion, and I say, Mr. Hitchens, what could you say, what verdict could you give on the life of Josephine Bakhita? And he could only say of her, because, to be consistent with his worldview, that she was deluded and her life was pitiable. All right, then. That's a point of view. But that's not what she says about herself. You know, Hitchens used to challenge people in debate and say, what good does religion do? And he had in mind, like, the goods of this world. You build a hospital or build a school. He says, I can do that without God just as well. But my retort to that is always, well, the one thing he couldn't give was transcendent hope. He couldn't give a point of view to someone like Bakhita in light of which they could pass the verdict on their own life that it was good. You see? And so the doctrine that suffering is meaningless, purposeless, or worse, like intentionally cruel, is a life without hope for those of us who suffer. But suffering's coming your way. There's no avoiding it, right? If you bring the point of view that it's purposeful, that it's meaningful, that it's potentially redemptive, then you can have hope, all right? When we look at those who suffer heroically and courageously for the sake of some greater good, we admire them. We admire them. And, you know, examples are too numerous to enumerate, right? I mean, we all know people like that who bear up courageously in the face of suffering for some noble good. And maybe it's just, you know, I'm going to quote an example from my own life. My dad, who may be listening to this show, he often does, is approaching 81 years old, and he's a complete paralytic. He can't even move his own fingers, right? He can't breathe on his own. He has to have a machine to breathe for him. He's dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, all right, ALS. And you say, how you doing, Dad? He says, doing great. What's up, Dad? He says, well, you know, I love my family, love my kids, love my wife. I'm grateful. I want to do everything for them that I can. I want to be a good example to my children, to my grandchildren. His life has meaning and purpose in spite of his sufferings. He never complains a day in his life. He has faith. His faith in God, has a hope in eternity. And that's the perspective that faith can give you in the face of suffering. And that's admirable. I look at that and I go, wow, I hope I can be a man like my father when I get older, if I'm faced with such a challenge. God forbid that I can face that with the kind of courage that he has and the kind of faith and hope that he has. So that's the gift of faith in the presence of suffering. And as a Catholic, we actually know that we can in a mysterious way participate in the sufferings of Jesus, so that our suffering is redemptive. It does contribute to our salvation and others. So that's reality seen in the light of faith. Now, looked at from the side of God, like, well, God's a mystery, and suffering is a mystery, and we have to admit that it's a mystery. The Trinity is a mystery. The Incarnation is a mystery. These are the mysteries of the faith. God created a world in which He knew there would be sin and suffering and moral and physical evil, but He didn't make that world all there was. You know, the horizon of our life is eternity. And in light of which, things that are inexplicable, incomprehensible, this side of the veil, will become intelligible and become understandable to us. But we can't deny there is an element of mystery. What do I mean by compulsion? Well, you're not going to like my definition. All right. When we no longer can freely use deliberative judgment. Right, and I'm not going to be more specific than that, because it's not for me to decide whether someone else actually has agency in their own case. Like, that judgment is made by God. I'm conscious in my own life that I've sinned, I've done wrong at times when I was so strongly, in an analogous sense, compelled. I was so desirous of evil that I felt like it was just overpowering me to do the wrong thing. And yet, I kind of knew at the back of my mind, just this tiny little sliver of doubt, that if I really, really wanted to, I could probably say no to evil. And then I went and did evil anyway.
Yeah.
All right? And so I'm not going to give myself a pass and say, well, I was compelled to do evil. All right? And yet, pastorally, if I'm dealing with somebody else, I don't want to condemn them.
Sure.
I'm going to let God make that judgment, not me.
All right. John, thank you so much for your call. Appreciated that. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go now to Keith in Houston, listening on Guadalupe Radio, AM 1430. Hello, Keith. What's on your mind today? Keith in Houston, are you there?
Hey, I am. Hey, good morning. Yes, guys, I'm here. I'm just doing two things at once. Dr. Anders, if you could say something about the Trinity. I was listening to another guest, and he was using the comparison of beings and persons, and also in terms of how far you can carry that to the point of souls. You know, how many souls does the Trinity have, and wills? You know, how many beings are humans?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. So I'm going to come at the Trinity from a couple different angles. One of them is not an explanation of the Trinity, but an explanation or an analogy of what it would mean to us to understand the Trinity. Right? That how is it that something that seems so obscure could be true? All right. Now, you know, there's a famous novel called Flatland.
Yeah.
A guy writes a book about Flatland. Flatland's a two-dimensional world where all the creatures are just two dimensions, like dots on a sheet of paper running around, you know. And from their point of view, the idea of a sphere, of something that was three-dimensional, is just incomprehensible. Well, tell me what a sphere is. Imagine trying to explain a sphere, a three-dimensional object, to a two-dimensional being.
Yeah.
You could, there would be no words to do it. And they'd say, well, you know, is it a circle? Not really. Is it a dot? Not really. Well, what's it like? Okay, watch. And then you pass the sphere through the plane. First, they see a dot. That's the edge. They, oh, it's a dot. Well, wait. Oh, now it's a circle. Oh, now it's a circle getting bigger. Oh, now it's a circle getting smaller. Then it's a dot again. Well, I know what a circle is. I know what a sphere is. It's a dot followed by an expanding and a contracting circle and then another dot. No, that's not what it is. No. But that's all I see. Yeah, but... All right. That's kind of what it's like to talk about the Trinity. How could something be a circle and a rectangle at the same time? Impossible, you say. Well, what about a cylinder? Aha, you add a perspective. All of a sudden it becomes intelligible. Okay? So when I look at the Trinity, I say, well, how can something be one substance, one essence, three persons?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't really know. Right? No contradiction there, because essence and person are two different things. So I'm not contradicting myself, but I don't really see how they fit together. So I can begin to approach it by analogies. This is just an analogy. It's not an explanation, just an analogy. St. Augustine says, look at the highest part of the human person. If we're going to draw analogies to God, let's go to the highest part, not our lowest part. In the human soul, human consciousness, there is an I. Not EYE, but letter I. An ego. There's a self, right? Mm-hmm. That knows, is conscious. Now imagine that self reflecting back on itself. Me thinking about me. There's the self, the ego, the I that knows. Then there's the me that is known, me appearing to myself as an object. And then there's the act of knowing. Now, is my act of knowledge me? Sort of. But it's not quite the same me as the me knowing.
Mm-hmm.
My knowing and me knowing are not exactly the same. And me known, was it the same essence? Is the same essence of soul present in all of these aspects? Yes, but considered under a different description, and there's a real distinction, even though it's hard for me to conceptualize. Well, he says, if you see the tripartite nature of human knowledge, you begin to have a kind of rarefied glimpse of the tripartite persons in the Godhead. Normally, when I encounter a person, there's one substance and one person. Person answers the question, who is that? Right? There's one human over I'm looking at and one Tom Price, and they're the same thing. But in God, there's one what, one essence, three who's, three persons. And the distinctions within the Godhead are not distinctions of substance or essence or nature. They're distinctions of person. All right? That, I understand those words. I don't know how they can fit together in one thing. But I have analogies from human experience. We come to the knowledge of the Trinity by faith and divine revelation because it's revealed to us in sacred Scripture. Don't really understand it, yet accepting the revelation on faith and turning around looking at the rest of reality in that light, the dogma of the Trinity illuminates our experience. So it's fruitful to me spiritually to consider. When I consider that in God as a Trinity of persons, God is a communion of love. Well, that says a lot to me about what to value in life. Right? The highest thing that there is in all of reality is a communion of love.
Keith, thank you so much for your call. We hope that is helpful for you. It is called Communion here on EWTN. A quick reminder that virtually everything we broadcast on EWTN radio is available as a podcast. So you can listen to it later. You can listen to it next week. You can listen to it as soon as the show is over with, as far as we're concerned. And we do that for just about everything that we broadcast from early in the morning, Sunrise Morning Show, Morning Glory, Catholic Connection, all the way through the evening hours with Catholic Answers Live. So here's what you do. Just go to EWTN and then click on radio and then click on podcast, and you'll find out all the great shows that you can download, listen to, subscribe to. It's all there for you. Go to EWTN and then radio and then podcast, and then you are good to go. Back to the phones now. Here is Bart in Madison, Wisconsin, listening on Sirius XM 130, a first-time caller. Hello, Bart. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon.
Howdy.
I'm starting RCIA courses next month, and I had a question regarding choosing a sponsor, and I was wondering if there are any regulations or guidelines and your recommendation for choosing a sponsor.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So I'll tell you a funny story about my own sponsor when I was received into the Catholic Church, and I did not go through RCIA. I was received into the church on a Sunday afternoon in November. the same day, as it turns out, that my fourth child was baptized. And I didn't really get a lot of instruction about the kind of logistical details of confirmation. I mean, I knew the doctrines of the faith. That's what I was professing. But in terms of like, show up here, stand there, I didn't get a lot of instructions. I didn't actually understand that I needed to come with a sponsor. And but I did know that my child needed to come with a godparent. And so we had a Catholic friend, and we didn't have a lot, right? I really didn't know any Catholics when I became Catholic. So we sort of reached out to our one Catholic friend and said, would you be godparent to our child? And she said yes. So the kid gets baptized, and then it's my turn to get confirmed. And the priest turns and looks at me and says, okay, who's your sponsor? And I was like, all of a sudden the godparent goes, me! So that's how it worked.
Okay.
So she's a nice lady, and I'm really grateful that she did that. But needless to say, I didn't put a lot of consideration to it. And we didn't get a lot of follow through after that event because it wasn't really planned, and she doesn't even live in the United States, as it turns out. So we see each other very rarely and communicate very rarely. So I tell you that funny little story because it's you can get confirmed in the Catholic Church, have a sponsor, and it can mean as much or as little as you want it to. Right? That's the thing. And your Catholic life is not going to be radically deficient if you have a fairly casual relationship with your sponsor. And many people do, because they come to the church, they don't really know anybody. And they meet someone in RCIA. There are people who often volunteer in parishes to stand as sponsors for candidates and catechumens. And that's perfectly okay.
That's actually what happened to me. When I became a Catholic, we moved to a different state. I didn't know anybody there. My wife didn't know anybody there, and she could not be my sponsor. I think maybe that was a rule that they had, or maybe that's the rule for all sponsors. But there was a couple, a man and a woman, who stepped forward and they said, "We'll be your sponsor," and that's the way it worked out for us.
There you go. Now, obviously, if you have a friend who's Catholic, or maybe a spiritual mentor or something,
Sure.
and there's a possibility that your sponsor, that relationship could flower in a deeper way, well, go for it.
Absolutely. Right? All right, Bart, thank you so much for your call, and we hope that things go well for you in RCIA. Let's go to Bob now in, looks like, Oklahoma City, listening on the Catholic Radio Network app. Hey there, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you for taking my call, Dr. Anders. I'm a revert, and my wife has been a Catholic, and so we get into interesting discussion from time to time. She thinks I fell off the deep end.
Of course.
But anyway, our discussion this morning was on Matthew 16:19. We were talking about the keys of the kingdom. It started off. She asked, "Where did the Catholics get the idea they can have a holy day of obligation or, obligatory Sunday masses?" And I used 19 to hopefully back that up with. So anyway, while we were both in the evangelical world, the keys were given to everybody. Everybody had the keys. And because of the word "you" is there, and everybody has a Bible, you can read "you." That means me and everybody else, and your favorite pet. So, but also because Jesus used the word "will," he says, "I will entrust you the keys." That means Jesus had to go somewhere and get them. And I remember this being taught when I was in the evangelical world, that Jesus had to go to hell to get these keys from Satan. And the verse to back that up with was Revelation 1:18, where it mentions keys of hell and death. So anyway, if I made any sense on this, could you give me an answer on that?
Absolutely, surely. So first of all, the interpretation that your evangelical friends have given you is just not exegetically sound, right? It doesn't even make sense of the Greek text, because Matthew 16:19, the word "you," of course, in Greek, pronouns can be singular or plural, and we no longer do that in English. We used to have thou and you, but now it's all just you, and we're indifferent between. Of course, if you live in the South, it sounds like maybe you do, you know about y'all.
Y'all.
All right, so if Jesus really wanted to, I give y'all the keys of the kingdom, that'd be plural, right? But that's not what he says. He uses the singular pronoun in Greek, all right? So second person singular, I give you singular. And when you look at the text, you are Peter, and you singular, I give the keys. not plural, not talking to everybody.
Yeah.
All right. And the idea that when I pick up a text of Scripture, that it is of necessity addressed to me singularly. The text doesn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in Genesis to Revelation that says that's the proper way to read the Bible. It's not in there, right? That is a modern Protestant idea that's brought to the text and imposed on it, and quite honestly violates the integrity of the text because it's imposing something from outside. The text doesn't actually say that, all right? Now, the idea that Christ went to hell to get the keys, he doesn't say, I'm going to give you the keys of hell.
Yeah.
He says, I'm going to give you the keys to heaven. And the better Old Testament reference is Isaiah 22, right, where the keys of the kingdom are understood in relationship to the prime ministership of the house of David, right? So he's making Peter like the prime minister or the major domo of his church, right? And so it's a very different kind of picture from what your friends have suggested.
And we thank you, Bob, for your call. Let's go from Bob in Oklahoma City to Bob in Springfield, Mass, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Bob, we just have a couple of minutes. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, real quick. Well, peace of love in Christ be with your spirit. And I'm not Catholic, but I love the Catholic faith and people in it. But, I know there was, perhaps I can give some enlightenment to whether Judas is in heaven or not from the gospel reading today, in where Jesus talks about the 12 of them, going to be judges, and they will be on thrones. But in the future, I'd like to talk about the Trinity, because I think I have the person's answer to that called in.
We're almost out of time, Bob. What's on your mind today?
So the question, I wanted to know the comment on whether Judas is in heaven, and the gospel reading kind of perhaps proves that today, that Judas is one of the 12 that will reside with Christ.
Yeah, I can answer that. Thank you very much. Judas is almost certainly in hell. He is almost certainly in hell. Christ himself says, of course, it'd be better for him never to have been born. And the other apostles, when they replace Judas with Matthias, speak about the son of perdition who went to, his reward and received the reward that was the just resort of his deeds, which were evil deeds. So Scripture itself looks very, very grim for Judas. And of course, Catholics also read the Bible in light of sacred tradition. And there's a really overwhelming consensus in the fathers of the church and in the sacred liturgy of the church going on for 2,000 years that presumes the damnation of Judas. So it's really not looking good for Judas.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Bob?
Well, the readings today, the gospel, if you read the gospel, he is in heaven with Jesus.
Nope, sorry. He's not in there, not in the gospel reading today. So I know when he talks about them judging the 12 tribes of Israel, so we're going to have to read that in light of the apostolic office that Judas vacates by betraying the Son of God to death. And Christ says, of course, better that he not be born.
Yes, indeed. Bob, thank you so much for your call. We appreciate you as a listener, as we appreciate all of our listeners. Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
We do the program Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern live here on EWTN Radio. We also bring that same show to you in the evening at 11 p.m. Eastern, primarily for our friends on the West Coast who just couldn't get that early airing in, but we play it out there for everybody. We also bring you the best of the week on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern, and you can check out the podcast, as we said earlier, at any time by going to EWTNradio.net. On behalf of Charles, Ryan, and Jeff, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anderson.